Welcome back. Today we're going to be having a look at some special decorations in Python. And we had a look at what decorators were last week, but there are already some built in that you can use in Python. So of course, decorations can be very nice, but the thing we need to understand first is static methods and attributes. And they belong to a class rather than an instance of a class. And they often used for constants. So if we take an example of pi, every time you create something that, for example, needs to know the value of pi, it doesn't need to store the value of pi itself. This can be stored in the class that it's using. And another static method might be a from file method, because if you want to create something from a file, you can't create your instance of a class and then read it from a file. You get your instance of a class by using the class and then reading from a file. So the common decorators we're going to look at are property decorator, static method decorator, which creates a static method, and the class method decorator, which creates a class method. So we've got a class called constants, and you can see that when we initialize it, it's got a number that we save as 0. It's also got these values of pi, e and phi, which are all irrational constants that it's just saved the first few decimal places of. It's then got this property called count, which we'll have a look at, and this class method, which again we'll have a look at. So here we're just printing out the constants value of pi, e and phi. And these symbols here are Unicode symbols, so that when we print it out we can actually print out the Greek letters, and then we put in the value. And we run that, and you can see it's printed out all the values. Something interesting to note though is we haven't actually created an instance of the class. We're using just the class name itself to get the value of these constants, which is quite nice. However, in here we create an instance of the constant, and then we see what the constant values are of pi, e and phi in a similar way. And you can see that even though this is now an instance rather than the class itself, it's still got all these constants saved. However, here we actually change the value of pi for the constant, so it's got fewer decimal places. And then we print it out with the original value, and you can see that it's updated just the value for this instance. So if we were then to create another instance, it would have the longer value of pi. Then we're going to print out the count, and you can see this is a property. So when we print out the count, it takes a number, adds 1, and then gives us back the number. So if we do this once, we've got the number is initially 0, and then the count is 1. But even though this count is a function, you see we've defined it, because it's a property, we no longer have to put brackets at the end. So we can just call it and it will do it automatically. And in fact, if we run it again, you see the number had already changed from the last running, and now we increment it again, and so we could keep running this and getting higher values of count. And this could be quite nice, for example, for a price, where you want to dynamically work it out, but you don't want the person to have to call a function. They can just get the value of the price. Then here we've got a class method called print pi, and this takes in a class, but it's called CLS because class is a reserved word in Python. And we print out, again, a symbol for pi, and then the class's value of pi. And if we run that, you see that in both cases we get the longer value of pi. So even though for the constant we change the value of pi, we've still managed to keep the original value of pi because it's part of the class rather than part of the instance. You can also have static methods as well as just static properties. So here we've got a multiplier, which is a subclass of constants, and it's got a static method called double, a static method called triple, and a property called tall. And so if we then define that, here we get the multiplier to double 2, and again we haven't created an instance of the multiplier, And then we're going to print out the multiplier and its value of tor. However, this time you see that we get a property object. So you can't use property and static method together, but the static method has worked. We've used multiplier, which is the class name, to double it, and of course you could create an instance and double it as well. So there's this nice piece of code that I found which allows you to have a class property, which is quite nice. And so I'll define that, and now you can see when we use our class property with tor and self, and this could be anything, it's just important it's got a name, it could be class as well. Then when we run it here, we see that when we call this very complicated function, which I'm not going to try and explain, just doubles pi and returns it. And so static methods are quite useful, as I said, for reading from files, because we could say maybe our set of constants, which we read from a file where you've got a comma separating the name and the value, is a constant dot from file, and then it returns a constants object, which will be quite nice. So you can see that static methods and properties and class methods are all really powerful. And this class property as well, which isn't inbuilt in Python, is also something that's quite nice to have. So hopefully you've learned about some advanced decorators, you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again same time next week. Till then.